You have absolutely no idea who the hell is going to find your work and how it's going to transform them.
Yeah.
So do it for you if it makes you feel alive. It's a wonderful feeling to feel connected with people, but you have no idea, like, the audiences that are going to find it and find comfort in it.
Writing is the engine that drives it all, and then there are these other things that you have to do in this day and age. I'm sure for you that's like what social media is.
Yes.
But like, it's actually the doing the thing that you.
That's what I love the most. But it's wild. I mean, all of the other things now take up more time
Yes.
than the thing I like to do, and I'm really trying to figure out how to just do the thing I love to do. But it's such a difficult balance.
No. I've thought about that a lot. Like, the reward for succeeding at your craft should not be that you don't have time to do the craft anymore.
Exactly.
But that's how it goes.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's like a way. I mean, there is. You just have to, like, I don't know, spend less time doing other things, less panels, less paid gigs, I guess.
There's a Frank Ocean line where he says you just have to be comfortable making less money.
Yes.
But that's very hard.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's like the opportunity costs of not doing the craft are not visible.
Yeah.
Right. So the day, like, you don't see the poem that you didn't write. You don't see the pages that you didn't do, or just like you don't see the reading that you didn't do. But there's a number attached to the gig that you turn down, or the appearance that you don't do, or the whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it requires, this is obviously first world discipline, but it requires a lot of discipline to be like, no, I'm going to turn down X amount of money and I'm going to stay home and do what looks like nothing to most people.
I love that that line that you said about you don't see the poem you didn't write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
and
true.
and you don't see it day to day, but I think you do see it piling up.
Yeah. And I think it's complicated too, because, like, even though, like, me and you we've had so much success, I don't know, I still struggle with the fact that there isn't security in being an artist.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I'm like, okay, well, let me just do all the paid things while I'm still getting them.
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe that's like a fear mindset that, like, you know.
No, there's like a scarcity. You know, at some point they're not going to be offering it to you, and you would kill to do it for half that amount, or a quarter of that amount, or for free.
Yes,
you know?
Exactly.
But there's also, I don't know, it's not, like, your book's 10 years old now. Like, you've been telling yourself that for 10 years.
Yeah. And it's like, I've been telling myself that for 10 years. And clearly the solution I've been applying for 10 years isn't working or leading me to be happier. And at this 10-year mark, I'm really like, okay, the solution I'm applying needs to change now for the outcome to be different.
Yes.
So what am I going to do at the end of this tour that is different? And I think I know what I'm going to do.
Ooh. What is it?
But it's scary. Like, I mean, I've been talking about taking a real break for how many years now? I feel like for 5 years now. That means stepping away from social media. It means not feeding that engine. It means not rushing to write the next thing. It means really just, I have not prioritized my personal life at all, really. And relationships suffer because of it. Friendships suffer. And so I think it's like time for me to live, and that's scary. I love my work. I'm such an ambitious person, but clearly work success doesn't feed that human need to feel love and connected.
Well, I'm always interested in the distinction between confidence and ego. And so there's obviously ego in, like, the audience will still be here when I come back, right? There's like,
I don't know, will they?
No, but like there's an ego in just saying, like, oh, of course everyone will wait on me.
Yeah.
I'll put the thing out when I'm done. Like, there's an ego version, and then there's a confidence version where you're like, it would be okay if I took a year off.
Yeah.
Some audience will still be there when I come back. I believe in my ability to earn an audience back, to get the momentum back, you know?
Yes.
And then there's also the insecurity of, if I stop, it will never come back together.
Yes.
Or whatever, you know, and that, that's so hard.
The last, I relate to the last two with the confidence and, that it might not come back. But then I think that, and I sit with that fear, and then I'm like, it might not, but what's the alternative? Me just continuing to live and work the way that I have been, and then what's going to change if I've been saying that it isn't working?
Well, and then do you have the success, or does the success have you? If you can't stop, then have you actually like earned, like, do you own anything, or does the thing own you? Like that there's something sad about that. Like if it is true that you couldn't stop and take a year off or slow down or do it differently because it would all fall apart. And that may be true as I think about it, but that's like not so impressive then, is it? That like you're chained to it for the rest of your life.
Exactly. That's not true success to me then.
No.
Yeah.
It's like a form of slavery.
Exactly. You're like locked in the golden cage.
Yeah.
And like running on that hamster wheel. It's not always fun.
What is it like to come back to your work, your first book, 10 years after you put it out?
It's really cool. I mean, it's so, I tried to like put the feelings of what it's like to come back to it in the introduction. I started writing the introduction earlier this year, and it's not, I've read Milk and Honey since it came out 10 years ago. I've read it cover to cover maybe 3 times.
Yeah.
Twice when I had to record an audiobook, and a third time this year when I had to write, put together the 10-year anniversary edition. And, I feel like sometimes my work, like I cringe at myself. We all do, I think, when we read our work, and it's been around for many years. But when I read it earlier this year, I was like impressed with my younger self.
Oh.
I was like, wow, that teenager, she kind of was like cooler than she gave herself credit for. And she kind of was like, she never celebrated herself. Yet how brilliant was she to lead me to the doorstep of the woman I am today? Yeah. She delivered me to this moment, and that is phenomenal. And so it was very bittersweet as well, because I get to like, I feel like she created so fearlessly. Yeah. And she had very little self-doubt, but that's because like she had nothing to lose, really. Yeah. She had no audience. This wasn't her dream. It wasn't even in her reality. So she was just totally driven by passion.
There's like an unencumberedness to doing your first thing, because you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And you're just doing it.
Exactly. And then the fear came after. And the self-doubt came after, and all the other things that aren't fun. And I was like, oh, I don't think I can do it again. And yet I wrote many books. Like I remember I wrote book 2, and I still was like, I'll never do it again. And I wrote book 3. I think now I'm like, okay, it will be hard. It'll never get easy, but I will do it again. But it's funny because like I'm often referring back to my 21-year-old self for inspiration. And
that's cool.
I'm like, let me tap into her strength and let me tap into her fearlessness. So that's kind of been.
No, I can relate to that, because I just did a 10-year anniversary of my first book. I think my first feeling was I can't have a 10-year-old book. Like I don't feel like I could do that, because it also just feels so fresh.
Weird.
Yeah, it feels like it just happened. And then the other part that struck me was like, because during the pandemic, I was trying to put my son to sleep one day, and so I was like, I'd read all his stuff. He wasn't going to bed. I was like, okay, I'm going to read you one of my books, like as a punishment. And I was reading it, and what struck me about it was like, I was like, where did this person get off? I meant that in like a nice way. Yeah. Like I was like, how did this 24-year-old possibly think they knew any of this? And then in some cases, like I didn't know and it was wrong, right? Like, and I went back and fixed that. But then the other part of me was like, how did I know something that I really had no business knowing? Like there's where like you
the
see
audacity.
Flashes of like, how could you have gotten something right that maybe you hadn't even fully experienced yet?
It's so cool, because I feel like I totally relate to you, and it's like I do feel like ideas sometimes they work through us.
Yes.
So you don't know, but the universe chose you to deliver that message, and that's pretty cool. But I feel you. I mean, I'm reading. I read when I was reading Milk and Honey again earlier this year. I was like, "What?" Yeah. And the audacity to put it out. Yes. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah. Then not going. How would this look for a insert age person to be saying this and to just say it as that person? Like, to me, the enemy of art. Good art is self-consciousness. Yes. Like the like, how is this going to come off? What are people going to think? You have to be in the moment and just do it. And I imagine with poetry, it's even harder because poetry is more of a, I don't want to say antiquated, but it's not, it's a thing so many people do badly and so few people get to be able to do. Yeah. And so there's probably something about poetry too, where you're just like an imposter syndrome feeling that would creep into doing poetry, I imagine.
I don't know. I think when I'm writing, especially, I mean, it hasn't been like this all the time. When I was writing Milk and Honey, I was so present with each piece. And so in those moments, I felt truly free. And I was writing without a focus on outcome or result and writing without judgment. Yeah. And so that was very freeing. And in a way, because I'm writing about my own experiences, that's freeing. Because I'm like, yeah, you might not like it, but it's my experience. You can't take my story away from me. So, and I struggled with book 2 and 3 because then I was thinking about the outcome and I was thinking about the result. And when I'm thinking about that, then as I'm writing, the judgment is right there, and that's when the writer's block comes out for me. But I'm finally, 10 years later, back in a place where I am writing without judgment.
Were you able to do, I don't know the timeline exactly, Milk and Honey, the book, or most of the poems come before social media, right?
A lot of them do. Like, I started writing them in maybe 2010, 2011. Yeah. I was performing first. Yeah. So I was on stage in front of a microphone. That's how I fell in love with the craft. And then I would write to perform. And all of my pieces were much longer performative pieces, anywhere from 2 to 6 minutes. And then my friends were like, there's social media now. Yeah. You can reach more people. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll experiment with it. And I found Tumblr. Yeah. And I had many different blogs. And at first, I was just sharing my visual art. I was a painter. I drew. And I wasn't sharing my poetry. And when I began sharing my poetry, there were so many iterations of my different blogs. And I was publishing a lot of my work first anonymously. But the sort of shorter, more concentrated poem that I want to hit sort of shots came when I found Tumblr, because I realized the difference between performance poetry and paper poetry at that point, because when I'm standing in front of an audience performing a 6-minute poem, I can see the way that poem comes to life and the way that it moves them. They're laughing, they're crying. We're sort of building up to a high frequency together. I take that same poem, I post it on Tumblr, and it's not felt in the same way at all. Yeah. And then I started to experiment with poems that I felt like were coming alive on paper. And so those are the poems that most people know me for, the shorter, more concise pieces. And then a few years later, I found Instagram when nobody was publishing anything with words on it on Instagram. And I feel like I grew with the platform,
I was just wondering, if there's probably a before and after, before your mind is aware of the algorithm and how, before your mind has the ability to do that twisted thing of how's this gonna do, and because I can only imagine what it would be like for me if every one of my pages was independently judged by the up or down of the social media algorithm, and how hard it would be to tune that out. To make something great that is a cohesive whole, you have to be removed from that. Yes. But it's hard to turn off the how's this gonna do? Will people like this? Is this the kind of thing that does well? Yeah.
I've thought about, I remember when I went to write my second book, The Sun and Her Flowers, I sat at my desk and I was like, at that point, Milk and Honey had sold millions of copies. It was on the bestsellers list every week for God knows how long. And the pressure was definitely there to repeat that type of success. And I went to write and I couldn't write a single word because I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't even know how I did it the first time. I wasn't even aware of it. So what do I do? And I don't know what the answer is, but the answer for me, it's always been writing. Poetry is such a spiritual and personal experience. The magic, I think, comes from me being honest about where I am. And I wrote to find answers to the questions that I was having. And so that's kind of what I tried to do. I mean, for a long time, I didn't publish my poems about depression and anxiety until the third book, because I was like, well, my audience really likes pieces about healing and heartbreak. So like, maybe this is going to be weird. And then they're going to be like, you have all this success. Why are you depressed? And then, and I ended up just going for it during the pandemic, and it landed, and it was like, okay. And I think these little small wins, these little reps that I'm doing, and then they're received by people, it does help. And I think over time, and I'm sure you feel the same, and I want to hear about that, eventually you just stop caring too. You're just like, all I can do is what I can do and write what I know. Mm-hmm. And I am so grateful to have been received for this long, and I hope that continues, but I have to honor myself first.
It's also, there's something about like, you've done it, and so you've done it, and then you can kind of weirdly be a little bit more indifferent to results. Like I imagine it's like if you haven't won a championship, it's hard to be like, I just love playing. It's easier to say that once you've done once you've scaled whatever the objective heights of your given profession are. Like you're a scientist, you win a Nobel Prize, then you can be like, I just like seeing where the science takes me. That's harder to do if you don't have like confidence is easier when you've like objectively earned it. Like we've done the thing and you can point to that thing.
That's true. That's very true. Are there, for you, was writing the following books like after the first, how was that experience for you? Did it get harder? Has it gotten easier? How are you reflecting on that 10 years?
Well, I got lucky. So my first book was about marketing, so it was sort of totally different. And then I wrote this book about Stoic philosophy that I didn't think would do big things, and my publisher didn't think would do big things. And when it came out, really didn't do big things. Like I think it sold like a few thousand copies its first week. But I'd already sold the second book. So I was just busy doing that. And so the fact that it wasn't disappointing, but it didn't exceed or it didn't like register really at all. But I was busy writing this second book, and it was sort of kicking my ass as all projects do. And then by the time The Obstacles Away really did start to take off, I was like towards the end of that second book and still getting my ass kicked. So like both I feel like it shielded me from the downside and the upside. And then what it did was I was really established like in my writing process and my writing style independent of the success. Whereas I know a lot of people like James Clear, Mark Manson, who like their first book sold like what my first 3 or 4 books sold combined, and that would be really destabilizing and disorienting. And I imagine for you, like,
very similar.
Your first book comes out, it's self-published, and then it does more than anyone could have imagined, even had it been like a huge expected hit. Like it was a monster, your book. And so, following that up would create a whole bunch of pressure and expectations.
At like 23.
Yeah. I didn't thankfully really have to deal with any of that. I dealt with it in different ways in different parts of my life. But as far as the books go, I had the luxury of like a slow, steady build, which it's funny when you put something out, whether it's on social media or a book, everyone wants it to be a monster success out of the gate. But it's funny when you talk to people who that happened to, they tend to see it as kind of a burden. Like they talk about how hard it was. Obviously they're grateful for it, but you think you want things to go a certain way, but you actually don't.
Because you have no idea the difficulties and the challenges it will bring.
Yes.
I was so naive. So clueless. Because, I mean, I thought a few hundred people were going to buy the book.
Right.
And I had already I was still in college. I had already bought my LSAT prep books. So I was like, hey, now I need to make real money when I get out of the school. I need to pay my student debt
Obviously,
off.
you can't be a poet. That's not a job.
Yeah. And I was performing for years, always for free, because I was like, I just love doing this. I'll do it for like nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting what you said about being able to develop your process through book 2 as well. I feel like only now am I less destabilized and developing a process that I'm like, okay, I can lean into this and it's working.
Yeah. Yeah, like you didn't get to be a regular person or a regular developing writer. You went from no one to happen, like unrealistic expectations, unrealistic audience. Like you just didn't get any kind of safety net or safe space to develop as in obscurity.
Yeah.
That must have been, I mean, again, like if you had to choose between that and it not happening, you would of course choose your thing, but it's a lot. Yeah. It is a lot. It's a lot. And I'm just so grateful that I got through it, because there were lots of years where I was like, this is the biggest mistake I've ever made. Really?
Like how do I put this into words? It just sort of knocked me off my center, pulled the ground beneath my feet, and it felt like I got on a train with self-publishing, and I was excited to get off a few stops later.
Yeah.
The train, not only did it not stop, it kept going faster and faster and faster. And it, brings with it its own sort of challenges. And I was very tough on myself through it. I was like, oh my God, I've dealt with this horribly. I'm failing. I'm doing this. I'm doing all the things wrong, even though from the outside it's looking great and fantastic. But now I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like I had to go through the hard bits of it. And now the confidence is finally here. Yeah. The stillness and the calm is finally here. And I know that it might not remain forever, but what I know now that I didn't know then is I can get through the hard moments and they won't like win. Yeah,
Tennessee Williams calls it the catastrophe of success, which I think is a beautiful phrase. And again, for people who are listening, and this sounds like, well, you should be so lucky. Of course, at the same time, a lot of people don't survive it. Mm-hmm. This is why we have things like the 27 Club, and why so few people have a second follow-up success. Like a lot of people, first off, it's just hard to do it once. It's hard to do it twice. It's really hard to do it twice after you've done it once, because you have all these expectations, you have all these distractions, you can get complacent, there's just all, you can feel like you're not worthy of it. There's just all this stuff that can kind of creep in that makes it hard for you to just sit down and do the thing from like a pure, authentic, like loving place.
Absolutely. Exactly. For me, I relate to that. And what I try to remember, what keeps me grounded during the hardest moment, ironically, has been my readers. And even I'm on the 10-year anniversary tour right now. And I feel really grateful because I'm meeting them each night. And there's so much love. And they're like, don't worry. You don't need to rush to the next one. Go off. Like, take a year off. Do this. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Because here, I've also told myself the narrative that people are just taking and taking and taking and taking. And now
they have all these expectations. And actually, they're like, they care about you more than they want you to take better care of yourself than you are.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been a nice reminder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, you meet someone and you go like, it's a surreal thing. I'm sure you've had this where someone tells you this like story about the completely outsized impact your work has had on them in a way that like obviously has very little to do with you and everything to do with them. But you're just like, if that's the only positive thing that my work had. So if my work had sold one copy, but it sold it to this one person who was going through cancer or survived, like I've heard from people, they're like, I used your book, I was in this cult and now I'm not in the cult. And you're just like, what? Like that, if you had said at the outset to me, or as I was conceiving the idea, like, hey, you're going to write this book and it's going to help this person, you know, like it's going to save their life, or it's going to save their marriage, or it's going to pull them out of this horrendous situation, you'd be like, oh, that I guess that's success. That would be worth all these hours. And you obviously have that times a lot of things. But then it's easy to kind of lose. It's easy to kind of abstract all that into the numbers of like total copies, or the size of an advance, or followers, or whatever. Really, like just any of those things would be make it plenty worthwhile.
That's exactly what I try to remember. I was in Brazil in 2023 when I was on my world tour, and I was reciting this poem. I was about to recite my final piece, but before that, I was sort of sharing some sort of like details about the challenges I've had, kind of like what we're talking about. And this woman shouts out, she's like, can I tell you a story? And my audience is always like talking back at me, which I love. There's so much fun banter. Yeah. But then when somebody says, can I tell you a story? I get a little nervous because I'm like, where is this going to go if I hand you the mic?
Yeah, there's all these people in the audience. Yeah. This could be a disaster.
And I hand the mic 99% of the time. Yeah. So I was like, sure. Sure. And then she goes on to tell me the story about how, so my Brazilian publisher ended up knocking at her door after my book became a bestseller in Brazil, because they were knocking at her door because they were looking for women of color writers writing about the themes I was writing about, and they wanted to bring that to like a wider audience in Brazil. And so they ended up finding her. They published her work, and then she became a national best-selling author and poet. And she was like, I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for Milk and Honey. And then all of these women in the audience started lifting their books and going, me too, me too, me too, me too. And in that moment, as I am sharing about these challenges and difficulties, I was like, okay, fine. Yeah. You know what? All the challenges and the pain that I've like felt privately, they're worth it if this is the outcome, if it's like allowed people to write and share and express.
I'm trying to find the actual Milk and Honey poem in here, because I knew the book and I'd read a bunch of the poems, but like sometimes, you know, there's things we're like, oh, that's where the title comes from. I guess I'd never actually seen the Milk and Honey poem. But it's just for people who haven't heard it. Of course, I want to be successful, but I don't crave success for me. I need to be successful to gain enough milk and honey to help those around me succeed. So that woman was basically telling you made real the whole underlying idea of the thing you had done. Yeah. That must have been kind of a magical
It was very magical. It's very magical. And it just is like, goes to show how connected we can be, and how just putting yourself out there, it could change the life of a person. And like you said, it's not me. I didn't change that life. It took them sort of stepping into their own light. The way that we're connected is like really cool. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I try to tell people, like, I think that's helpful for people to hear when they tell you all the things that your book did for them. I try to remind them, it was like, you did it though. Yes. Like it was just sitting there. Exactly. First off, you read it, but second, like, the words don't mean anything unless you do something with them. Like, you did the work.
Exactly. You know? Absolutely. I try to remind them of the same thing, because I'm like, I'm not out here trying to save anybody's life. So if you saved your own, you should know that you did that.
Yeah, you can't save someone's life with a poem. Exactly. Do you know what I mean? Like, they have to take it and believe it or use it. I had a super weird experience in Brazil like a month ago. The same thing. So what happened when I was 20 years old, I bought Mark Surreal's Meditations. This specific translation came to me on Amazon, and I read it. And I remember just like, this is the most amazing thing I've like ever read. I was like, everyone should know about this, right? That was what I thought. And so I was just in Brazil. I was doing a talk, and I'm walking through the airport, and I see out of the corner of my eye a copy of Mark Surreal's Meditations in an airport bookstore in Belo Horizonte, I think. And so first off, that's 20 years ago when I read Mark Surreal's. And even today, it's not a book you see in airports very often. There's not, like, obscure schools of ancient philosophy do not get a lot of airport bookstore real estate, let alone in Brazil, right?
Yeah.
And so I walk over and I look at it because it's the translation that I loved, and I think I have it I don't have it here. I guess I have it in my office, but it's this. It's this translation, but it's in Brazil. It's in Portuguese, but then at the top is a quote from me. Like it's my endorsement of the book, which I did not know anyone had taken and put on this. And so I'm just like, oh wow, this is incredible. Like, and I was like, oh, I did it. Like, I read this book and it meant something to me and I wanted people to see it. Wow. And then you flash forward almost 2 decades and I'm bumping into that thing that got unleashed in the world, and you're just like, oh.
What a magical moment.
It was crazy.
Wow. That is a magical moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you buy the copy?
I did. So it was actually funny. So I bought, but they were like, it was like 10 of them wrapped together. And so I was like, I went to the woman, I was like, can I buy one of these? And she's like, what? You know, because I don't speak Portuguese. And she tries to ring me up for like 10 of them, and I'm like trying to explain, and then finally someone who spoke English in line got out and explained it, and I was like, no, I'm buying it because that's me. Like, I just wanted to tell this random stranger, like, that's me. But yeah, it's crazy when you have this idea to do this thing, and there's something insane about it.
Yeah.
And then you do it.
Yeah.
Like, I got to imagine you're self-publishing a book about poetry in 2014. What does success to you look like? 100 copies, 500 copies?
I wasn't even thinking about a number because it was so. I mean, not my publisher, my professor who had initially asked her for advice, and I was like, I'm trying to get published. What should I do? And I mean, she just told me what she knew. She was just like, well, you're not going to get published. Yeah. Nobody publishes poetry. Like, find another genre. Yeah. Or, you know, you could submit to poetry journals and anthologies, which I tried to do, but I felt like I was like cheating on my work. Yeah. Because I thought that it's meant to be experienced as a body of work. And I just did it because the feeling, I think it comes from performing, is when I'm performing, I'm so connected to my audience. And it's such a magical feeling that's why I wanted to put the book out. It was like being connected in a different way. We were having conversations about these topics, whether it was violence, sexual abuse, healing, trauma, love. We're having these conversations online, and I'm such a lover of books. Like, it's a totally romantic idea.
Sure,
to have
just it existing was success.
And so I was like, okay, great, I'll put it out. Yeah. And, you know, I had like less than 10,000 followers on Instagram at the time. And then, I put it out, and everything that happened after that was a surprise. And even when my publisher came knocking in 2015, about like 8 months later, and also I think what helped is I had no clue what the standard was. I had sold about 18,000 copies of the self-published edition, which to me was nothing, because the only concept I've had of like numbers was music sales. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, so-and-so's like triple platinum silver. That's like 1 million trillion copies. Like, I'm so far away from that. Yeah. And so when they came knocking, I eventually signed over with them. And then when that edition came out, exactly like a year later, I was still in school. And that book came out, I graduated that month, like so much happened that month. There was no, then I went off social media, I went off to India. There was like no press, no marketing. That's how much I didn't expect anything to happen. Yeah. And then I come back, and it was insane because it was just word of mouth, people passing the book on to each other.
Yeah, I try to tell people that it's like a gold album is 500,000 copies in music. I would say like a gold book is like 50. It's like 10 times lower. Yeah. Do you know what, like, it just, I think books punch above their weight culturally, but it's a relatively small. So anytime you hear about something selling 1 million copies, it's enormous. It's, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't happen.
It's hard to sell books.
Yes.
A lot of my friends, like, I'm not going to name names, but they, you know, they're like, one of them is like an incredible accessories and shoe designer. She sells shoes that are like $800 a pop. Yeah. And she wrote a book, and she comes to me. And anytime my friends publish books, I really have to like bring their expectations from here to here.
Yeah.
And then she comes to me and she's like, girl, selling books, I don't know how you do it. She's like, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's easier for me to sell $800 shoes.
Of course.
Yeah, it's
well,
tough.
You can just put on an $800 pair of shoes. Like a book is not only is it like, first off, music is free like to download or to stream. So like that's a huge part of why they do these huge numbers. But also it's like it's not asking anything of you. A book, even a book of poetry, is asking someone to sit down and not do anything else and spend hours with this thing. And that's like a lot. And it's expensive.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a crazy set. Like, of all the artistic mediums, it might be like the hardest sell. Maybe other than like physical sculpture, because it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know what I mean? Like,
thank you for putting that into perspective, actually.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
You pay for it up front, and it takes hours of the person's time.
Yes.
And in some cases, it's challenging them. Like, music is like, let me make you feel good. Or music's not like, let me confuse you, or let me challenge your deepest held assumptions.
Or let me trigger you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a tough sell, I think.
Absolutely. But I think you and I would, I'd keep doing it again and again and again.
But you don't have a choice. You don't get to choose the medium that you're called to.
Exactly.
Although it's funny though, because I think you're so big at this point. I think there are some people, and this is a sign, I think, that someone's done something well, where it looks easy. So I imagine some people think that, first off, it's poems. It's not that many words.
It's not that many words.
And yeah, like it's sort of like anyone can do it.
Yeah.
But if anyone could do it, a lot more people would do it, and the average poetry book wouldn't sell, 16 copies.
Yeah. It's funny because I use very simple diction.
Yeah.
And that's very purposeful because there's so many different types of poetry and they're all great. But for me, I started writing poetry. I wasn't even aware that it was poetry. I was just trying to do the emotional work. And for me, that required the simplest sort of diction because I didn't want to have to decipher what the poem was saying. I wanted to read it and it hit me quick and fast so that I could sit there with it and do the emotional labor and do the emotional work of figuring out, okay, what does this experience mean and how do I process it? So those smaller pieces that are even like 4 lines are so much harder to write than the ones that are 4 pages. Like when I'm working on a book of prose, and it's like I'm so excited about that because I'm like, oh my God, thank God. It's not going to take, it's so much easier.
Interesting.
Because there's more space for me to like dive into many different directions. But the books with the shorter pieces, it's that so much of it I have to leave up to the universe to sort of like work through and deliver through me. I find that much more challenging.
There was this early Stoic named Cleanthes, and he was saying that poetry, like life, the constricting nature of it is what creates the opportunities. So like he says, like the fetters of the poetry, like pushing air through a flute, that's what creates the music. If you could do whatever you wanted, or and your poetry is not super rule based, I would say, but if you had unlimited space, it wouldn't have the same effect. It's the constraining nature, the obstacles like we experience in life, that create the music of the poetry. Like a haiku is the ultimate example of this. Like you can only do this, this, and this, and it makes you get weird with it. Like it makes you get creative in ways that you wouldn't if you had a choice. Do.
And that's like writing a poem is like putting together a puzzle.
Yeah.
And so like we all have our own sort of rules. Even I have them, and that's what makes creating the puzzle really fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
And meaningful.
Yes.
Because if it was just blah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and there's a freedom in the prose I'm writing because I'm like, okay, I can just relax and just go whatever direction I want to go in. But then bouncing back and forth between the two is also nice.
But then, when you go back and edit it though, the constraints come back in. You're like, this is boring. This is taking too long. I got to tighten this. I've said this before. I think people think writing is the stream of consciousness. That's like you know, you hear about Jack Kerouac writing on the road in some like 36-hour, you know, bender or something. I don't think any great literature has ever actually been done stream of consciousness. That might be how you get some of it down.
Yeah.
But it's in the rewriting and the edit. I imagine even a 4-line poem for you.
Oh my God.
It didn't take 30 seconds.
No, I'm like writing hundreds of drafts. I save each edit and each version I save. And I love editing like that because I'll like write the piece and then usually I write it in my journal, and if I feel like, and then after days of writing, I'll like look through and I'm like, oh, this one works, this one's cool. I'll circle the ones that I like, whatever I get for my free writing session. I translate that over to like a document, and then when I begin the editing process, it's like I edit it and then I copy paste below. I edit that, copy paste below, because then I can see the different versions and the evolutions of it. Because sometimes you do over edit, and then you're like, oh my God, the version 4 versions ago was so much better. Let me go back. And so it's, you know, each book is thousands of pages long, like when you look at all the versions of the pieces. But it's really beautiful. That's the funnest part for me, right? Like,
have you heard that Mark Twain thing about the difference between the right word and the almost right word?
No.
He says it's the difference between lightning and lightning bug.
No, I haven't heard that one.
There is some, it's like you'd think it's like, okay, I got the sentence down.
Yeah.
But it's actually like 14 versions of the sentence later that you get it exactly in the right order, and you're just like, fuck.
And then it like hits you, makes your stomach turn, and it's such a good feeling.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's what keeps a writer going. Is
exactly
the couple times that happens.
What are the rules? Like some of my rules when I'm writing, I explore those in my 4th book, Healing Through Words. Like with the shorter pieces specifically, I have each poem, I try to have one thesis statement, and every word and every line has to do the heavy lifting of trying to prove that thesis of the poem correct. That's my sort of like rules. Do you have rules when you're writing, or constraints?
I don't. I think most of my constraints are more like you have only a certain amount of space to do this. Like, this is what the format, the style of the book, like right now I'm on this 4-book series, so it's you know, this is the style, so it has to fit in here, and you only have so much space. I heard this thing about Raymond Chandler once, where he would write on these in his typewriter, because that's when he was writing, he would write on these small pieces of paper, and his rule was that like something had to happen on each page. So if you're just writing, like, a Word doc is not a page in a book. It might be 3 pages in a book. Right. So you can kind of you feel like you have more time and space than you actually do. So I break each of my books up into like, you know, let's say it's 30 chapters. It's 30 documents. It's not until the very end that it all comes together, and then I edit it as a whole. So by breaking up in these smaller pieces, that thing has to really sing. Yeah. Like they're not exactly the same as a poem, but it's like I'm doing these individual little arguments, and then that argument contributes to the overall thesis. And then you know, later when you're editing it, you have sort of tags, or you know, it comes together as this cohesive piece. But I think the big rule for me is that it has to work as this independent chunk. Yeah. And if it doesn't, then you're not. It's not what it can be. Right. I think that's a big one. Yeah,
I love that idea, and I love that what you said about each page has to do something. Yeah. That same with each poem. That's how I feel. I'm like, if you're gonna take up space in my book, you better work hard.
Yeah. I think another rule, I was a research assistant for this writer named Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, and he was talking to me early on about like diversity in this stuff, and he wasn't arguing it from a political correctness standpoint or even like a social justice standpoint. He was just like, you want to have a lot of readers, and every reader should be able to see something of themselves in the book, right? And so it's like, if all your things are from 20th century American history, that's only going to be relevant to some people. And so he was like, no, you've got to like get something from everywhere. So Chinese history, and then business history, and sports, and music, and like white and black, and East and West. And so I think another rule that really helps me is the sort of forced, it's not quotas because I don't think about it that way, I'll just get a sense of like, I'm talking too much about the same people or the same kinds of people. So now I want to go find someone or something that's like out of left field here. And that forces me to like take on new characters that and I end up going down these whole rabbit holes and finding this whole other perspective. And I get really excited. I'm like, I didn't know anything about, this person or that person. And now emerging from the book, they're like one of my heroes. I love that.
You get to like learn yourself, and it stays exciting for you and continues to feed you. Because the worst thing is when you're doing the work and it's no longer feeding you.
Yeah, you're just doing, like you said earlier, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, it's like very boring, and then ultimately boring for the audience too. Like you want to sort of you want to be on fresh territory as often as possible.
Exactly. Yes, that's I think it was like in my mid-20s I was really struggling with this idea of staying relevant, and I could not figure out how to move past that. And my therapist was like, the moment, like, you're relevant right now because you're interested in what you're writing about. The moment you stop and the moment you're just thinking about the audience, you're going to stop being relevant. So like, focus on that. And that was really freeing because I was like, okay, that means it gave me the permission to just serve myself, because that is what she was saying, was keeping the work alive and relevant and all of these things.
Yeah, you know who Rick Rubin is?
Yes.
Yeah, he's talked about, he's like, as soon as a band is trying to like do what's relevant or like what's popular now, they're dating themselves. He's like, you should go to a museum and find yourself inspired by something that's 1,000 years old. Like, you want to find those more eternal, timeless sort of sources of inspiration. You want to serve something that's like fundamentally human, as opposed to whatever, like, whatever people are talking about right now. By the time you write about it and by the time it comes out, it's probably, you probably already missed the wave.
Exactly. Times change. Yeah.
Was it weird? Because what's cool about this book, which I didn't think to do, I love that, is a book isn't just what it is. It's the people that read it and are influenced and connected to it. The idea of hearing what other people thought about the poems and what they meant to them, that must have been really cool.
Yes. Are you speaking about the other annotators?
Yeah, all the annotators. Yeah, that's such a cool idea.
Yeah, I remember reaching the end of my own annotations and realizing as I was writing the introduction, like, Milk and Honey is not just my book anymore.
Yes.
I wrote it, cool, and it was mine when I wrote it. And then I like shared it with the world, but the way the world has received it, it belongs, it's not fully mine anymore. And so the 10-year anniversary edition, it wouldn't make sense to just have my voice in it. And so then I started reaching out to friends. And I remember the first time I met Malala, I didn't know that she'd read my work. And she comes to me and she's like, I read all your works right before I got married. Your books were the ones that I was reading. And I was so moved by that. So then I invited her to annotate, and then also Camila Cabello, and she
shared one of my things on Instagram once. It was very cool.
Oh, I mean, I listened to the episode with you and her, which was so great. She's so well spoken and lovely.
I know.
But it was really cool to just sort of give these women the book, and these are like women who've arrived at my table after publication. Then I also went to women who helped me build that table and who were there before that table was even built. Women who've been in my life forever and watched me do this. And it was interesting to see the pieces that they picked and how they reflected on it and how they included other women. I love Malala's annotation referencing the girls in Afghanistan who are losing so many human rights.
Isn't it crazy? We were talking about like someone coming up to you and your works meant something to you. I don't know about you, but I sometimes get very self-conscious because I'm like, I wrote this thing from my experience, which was a fraction of that person's experience. The idea that they were going through cancer or some, horrendous thing, or they're winning the Super Bowl, they're doing something. I'm like, you really took like a chance, like putting weight. I'm not sure that this was a weight-bearing book. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird, like, for someone like her, who's had this incredible life and is so incredibly brave, to be like, oh no, this is true. Like, this is good. That must have been, you're like, what? It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's like nice sometimes too, because I'm like, all I do is sit in my head and beat myself up.
Yes.
So like, that's really nice. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just like, oh, you're making real life decisions based on what's in here. Like, okay.
You never know how something's going to land. Like, I don't have a single poem in, I think, any of my books. I'm pretty sure, about battling cancer or any type of sickness. But the amount of people who've said to me on this book tour, this is like, I was reading all your books again and again while I was like fighting this disease and I was hospitalized for so long. And I'm like, which part? Like, but it's like amazing because I mean, human emotions are clearly so universal that they land with people in unexpected ways.
Yeah, it's like I was writing this because I was frustrated in traffic. And then you're taking it to, it's like world-changing cause that you're fighting for. And like, I'm honored that it spoke to you, but like, I'm also just like, yeesh, like that, like I'm glad it held up because like it was built under flimsier circumstances than the stress test that you are subjecting it to.
Absolutely.
It's like, like mountain climbing equipment. It's like weighted. It's like set up for different weights. And it's like, I only tested this a little bit. And then you are taking your life in your hands.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
There's something surreal about that.
It is. It's really surreal. It's wild. And I mean, the stories, I mean, you've heard the stories. People tell you their stories. And I mean, it is. And that's why I always tell, like, so many people come up to me at book signings and they're like, I write, I'm scared. Should I put my work out? Am I supposed to feel nervous? And I tell them, I'm like, as long as you feel safe, put it out. Yeah. You have absolutely no idea who the hell is going to find your work and how it's going to transform them. Yeah. So do it for you if it makes you feel alive. It's a wonderful feeling to feel connected with people, but you have no idea, like, the audiences that are going to find it and find comfort in it.
Yeah. It's like, sometimes it's helpful. Like, I no one I knew went to like Ivy League schools. No one growing up was like really successful. Then you meet some like really well-educated idiots, or some like incredibly successful people that you're just like, oh, they did it.
Oh my
gosh. Like, it's very helpful because then you just, it's like nobody really knows what they're doing. Like, you think they're these like,
you think they
adults
know
out there that are just, perfect. And then you're like, oh yeah, there's something silly about imposter syndrome, as if one, everyone's not feeling it, and there aren't some like actual imposters out there getting away with it
who have Ivy League like degrees. Oh, totally. I mean, I remember, I'd sold millions of copies of Milk and Honey. It was like, doing all of these wild things. And my number one obsession was trying to find a master's like program to go into so that I could be an official, feel more official doing it, because all of these other poets, they went to like, they did their MFA or were here and did that. And I was like, I need that to like call myself a writer.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in kind of mystifying things and making it seem more significant than it is, and dramatic and glamorous than it is. And that, because I don't know, but it has the effect of being very intimidating to people who are on the outside.
Yes.
And it's really not, and people perpetuate it too. Like, they go like, what kind of pen do you use? And it's like, this is the least important question. Like, none of this shit matters.
Like, none of us know what we're doing. Just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when people are like behaving too much like they know what they're doing, I'm now a little suspect. I'm like, just chill.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's there's I try to remind myself of like the silliness and the absurdity of it too. Like,
exactly.
it's not that important. It really doesn't matter that much in the big scheme of things. Anyone can do it, and it just to kind of, because if you build it up too much in your head, it intimidates you. It also, I think, can make you self-important, right? You're like this isn't that special.
Yes.
And
there's no one right way to do it. Yeah. So you could find your own way to do it.
You want to go look at some books in the bookstore real fast?
Let's do it.